right. Thank you for bearing with us. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Helen. And it's so lovely to be here with you all this evening. It's amazing to see that the number of participants is climbing closer to 200, which is fabulous. And Helen was kind enough to say that if there's anything I don't know about wildlife gardening, it's not worth knowing. But of course, the reality is that we've all on the learning curve somewhere. And I do find that in these talks, when we get the chat, when we get the questions towards the end, I always learn something. I always learn many things. And I hope that what I'm able to bring you in the next 40, 45 minutes before we go to questions will help you as well. Right, let's see if I can share the screen. I'm not the most technically adept of folk, but let's go with it. I'm going to just look to Helen to check that the slides are up.
Yep, that's all great.
Oh, good. Thank you. So tonight's talk, the title I made rather prosaic, really, how to make and maintain mini meadows for wildlife. I was keen that you knew what the subject matter was about. But at the same time, I felt that prose was one thing, but poetry might be better. Magical mini meadows, I thought might have been a better title. And I do think that this is one of the most exciting, rewarding, fulfilling things that you can do within your garden or outside space. I thought I ought to start with a little bit about me for those who might not know me. And I'll start with this slide just to prove my gardening credentials. There we go, presented by the National Vegetable Society in the Children's Essay Competition. It doesn't get any higher than that in the Garden Oscar stakes. What I don't know about cucumbers isn't worth knowing. So there's me, my gardening credentials laid bare for you. In terms of what I do in my day job, I pulled up this slide. So as part of my job with the RSPB, I project manage all sorts of projects. It's always weird when you stop a video. It does look like I'm in full song there, wearing my MC Hammer trousers, but that's me project managing the Medmenary Managed Realignment Scheme, where we let the sea into a big bit of the Sussex coastline. And my day job can include setting up new nature reserves or managing the building of new visitor centres. But in my spare time, wildlife gardening is my absolute passion. And I've just realized that in terms of fashion, I've just showed you two of the worst photos I could show you. I really don't know how to manage my wardrobe, do I? But there I am in one of my ponds that I created. And as part of that passion for wildlife friendly gardening, I get to do a load of work as a volunteer for the RSPB, presenting, going onto radio, going onto TV. I've done country fowl from my garden. I write in every edition of Garden Answers magazine, which you'll find in the newsagents. Done that for 14 years now. So I think that's something like 170 articles in Garden Answers magazine. I write in the RSPB magazine, where every edition I go to visit somebody who's doing something amazing for wildlife. And I got to write the RSPB book about the subject, which is now out in its second edition, I'm pleased to say. So that's me as a wildlife friendly gardener. It's now time to go to meadows. Oh, no, it isn't. There's my little thing popping up in the right-hand side. Of course, Helen introduced the Wildlife Gardening Forum. I think I've been a trustee for 12, 13 years now. I think what Helen didn't say is that it's entirely run by volunteers, and your donations to come into the talk tonight go to fund our work trying to engage people around the country with wildlife-friendly gardening. So thank you very much. Yeah, meadows. And I thought I'd bring up a painting by Monet to start with. I don't know about you, but I look at that photo of a painting and I take a wonderful deep breath. There's something so relaxing for me about meadows as a habitat. And it seems to have entered the public psyche as a place that, I don't know, is all about happiness, really. I mean, if you're a hobbit, your world revolves around meadows. Hobbits seem to live amongst mini meadows. And indeed, if you want a wonderful head of hair, then yeah, why not go and shampoo yourself in a meadow and be chased by a man carrying a cross made out of flowers, wearing very tight white trousers? That's the essence of a meadow, isn't it? And I thought I'd start with a potted history of meadows. I'm making it the most potted history you'll ever have seen. It's a potted history in 4 photos. So here we have the 1930s, a genuine 1930s photo of a meadow in the UK with a farmer turning his hay and presumably his child playing about in the meadow. And at that point, there were lots of hay meadows. Then over the next 50 years, we saw a lot of meadows that were ploughed up. There were a lot of meadows that were developed. And I do find this photo particularly ironic. You can find lots of housing developments where streets, avenues, cul-de-sacs are named after a meadow that presumably once existed there, but doesn't anymore. And as well as the ploughing up, a lot of meadows got fertilized, they got herbicided. So the meadows often still exist as a grass pasture, but without all of the plant diversity and hence the biodiversity that changes them from being just a plain grass meadow into being the hay meadow, the wildflower meadow that we love. And over that time period, from the 1930s to the 1980s, an average of 385 hectares were lost every single day over that period. Christmas Day, Easter Day, whatever day, on average 385 hectares lost every day, adding up to a 97% decline in meadows over that period. Thankfully, the few bits that have left have managed to survive in the period since, but without any great gains since. And so I thought I'd put up this slide, which is, in ecological terms, meadows tend to get called semi-natural grasslands, which to me isn't quite as poetic. But what we've got left is about 61,500 hectares, hectare being a little bit bigger than a football pitch, of lowland dry acid grassland, which is about 1/4% of the land area of the UK. When it comes to calcareous grasslands, which are the chalk and the limestone grasslands, such as on the Downs or over on the Chilterns or the Cotswolds, it's less than 1/5 of 1% of the UK land area. And when we look at pure lowland meadow, we're a tiny percentage there, and upland hay meadow even less. So a tiny percentage of what was once one of our most expansive habitats is left. And when you compare it against gardens, well, we think there is a 433,000 hectares approximately of gardens in the UK, which is 1.8% of the UK land area. And I think what that slide then tells you is that we have, as the combined gardening population of the UK, a brilliant chance to put a bit back of all of that that's been lost. And that thought of putting some meadows back makes me so happy that I thought I'd find a slide that expresses my happiness. The Teletubbies live in a meadow, and their happiness inspires me hugely. They look so related to hobbits, don't they, with their little hobbiton in the background. I thought I'd show you some of the inspirational meadows that still exist, that tiny percentage that still exists. And this is a meadow called Eads Meadow, which is a few miles from where I was brought up in rural Worcestershire. And here it is. It's survived the plough, it's survived the herbicides, it's survived the development, and stuffed full of orchids and other wildflowers. And this is a wonderful meadow that I visited in Suffolk a couple of years ago, which is full of green-winged orchids. And then you can see the lush, leathery, strap-like leaves of meadow saffron, which will flower in the autumn, often called autumn crocus, but meadow saffron's the real name. And then the sea of buttercups. So we have got some absolute gems of meadows left, which I would say are well worth visiting to give you the inspiration of what you can try and recreate a little of in your garden or outdoor space. But the place that I go for my real meadow inspiration is over into mainland Europe and up into the mountains, where some of the most diverse and beautiful and rich meadows still exist. This is Austria, a place called Wengen, up on the hillside above Wengen. Just to the left of this photo, you'd have the north face of the Eiger. Again, you get this beautiful array of wildflowers that continue to exist in the meadows. But I think one of the things that really inspires me about going to the Alps and the mountains of Europe and their meadows is that when you go into the towns and villages themselves, what you see is that the meadows continue to exist as people's back gardens. Everywhere you go, a meadow is what people look out onto, or often a mini meadow. This again is Wengen, another of their little mini meadows. And this next slide I took in Zermatt in Switzerland. You can see a line prop in the background and one of the chalets, and yet you've got meadow clary growing in the garden next to where people hang out their washings. And to me, this is really inspiring to show that having a meadow in your back garden is something to aspire to. And maybe our trend for neat, tidy gardens is not something that is natural to us. Having a mini meadow can bring that laxness, that sense of relaxation into a garden environment. Some of my inspiration, as well as going to real meadows, comes from our four founders, the shoulders on which we build our trade. And these three folks certainly inspired me in my early years of wildlife gardening. On the left is the Book of Meadows by Christopher Lloyd, who was the famous gardener at Great Dixter in East Sussex. And his meadow there is still in place, managed by the head gardener, Fergus Garrett, and really is a wonder to see. In the middle is the book by Chris Baines, which really helped to galvanize wildlife-friendly gardening. Been through many issues now, how to make a wildlife garden, and I'm sure that many of you have got that. And on the right, the book by Pam Lewis, Making Wildflower Meadows, from the wonderful experiments that she did at Sticky Wicket in Dorset. So there's some wonderful folk who have been making meadows for many years now. I've also been privileged to visit many people in their meadows. This is Richard Brown over in on the Norfolk Lincolnshire border. He's the guy who set up Emmersgate Seeds, from where you can buy a lot of your wildflower seeds these days. And he gets his expertise from his own meadows and from his own scything expertise. And he was delighted to show me scything in action. It was poetry in motion. And I've also been to visit Jenny Steele, and this is her garden on the Herefordshire Welsh border, and is an absolute delight. And Jenny, of course, has championed wildflower meadows, mini meadows and pop-up meadows for many years now. Quickly, I'm just going to say what we're not talking about tonight, and what we're not talking about is cornfield annuals, which in the press so often get called meadows these days. And I'm just going to give you a quick explanation of why this is not a meadow. It's beautiful and it's well worth growing, and it's fabulous often for pollinators, but it's not a mini meadow. So on this slide, on the left, we have a field of cornfield annuals, and on the right, we have a mini meadow. Meadow, coming from the Old English word, which derives from the Germanic meaning to mow. Mow being a word, doesn't necessarily mean with a lawnmower, could be with a scythe. When you go out with a scythe or a sickle, you're mowing. You're cutting the grass rather than disturbing the soil again. And my simple way, as simple as I can describe it, if you've got a bed of cornfield annuals, your management technique is to dig the ground and sow. And then because they're annuals, you'll need to dig that ground again and sow again. You could try and rely on the seed bank throwing up the flowers for you, but so often you need to re-sow. And that's the cycle. Dig and sow, with probably a bit of weeding along the way to deal with anything that comes in of its own accord. Whereas with a perennial meadow, a hay meadow, a wildflower meadow, one that you mow, you do dig to start the meadow, you then sow it, and then your management technique is mow, 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 and mow, but not very often. So very different techniques for these two different things. You will see cornfield annuals sold, talked about as a meadow. I always talk about them as a bed of annual flowers or cornfield annuals versus a wildflower meadow or a hay meadow. So I did promise that tonight I would show some case studies of meadows, mini meadows, pop-up meadows that I've been creating in my own garden. I'm incredibly lucky to have an acre of garden, but it is in suburbia, and it gives me the chance to experiment with all sorts of little bits and pieces and find out what works and what doesn't work. And we'll see some mistakes that I've made along the way as well. But here we go. Here's my garden. You can see how much it's surrounded by suburbia. You can see about 100 meters away, I've got a very busy dual carriageway, main A road. I've got houses all around. And my first mini meadow I'm going to show you is my largest. Some of you will be thinking, oh, I haven't even got a garden of that size. 20 meters by 10 meters is this first one. But don't worry, we get smaller as we go along. But anyway, I'll show you my first one, which is Chicken Pen Meadow. And this was my starting point. When I took over the house and garden, it had been abandoned for a long time. And this was the state at the far end of the garden, with some self-seeded, predominantly damson trees that had just suckered all over, very little ground cover because the chickens had weeded everything out, just a few nettles and a few stinking irises poking up. That was my starting point. So taking that rule of how to prepare and sow a mini meadow, first step is to dig, and by dig I mean dig with a spade, dig with a fork. In my case, I came in with my dad's rotavator for this one, cleared those damson suckers, got in, turned the ground. Having turned it, I raked it, allowed any weeds that were in the seed bank to come up, hoed them off, and raked again to give a really fine tilth. Really important when you're sowing from seed is to create this fine crumbly texture. So when the seed is broadcast across it, then it has a great chance of being in close contact with the soil. Here's my seed. I love the fact that creating a mini meadow is really very cheap. Even on a scale like this, buying a bulk load of seed compared with trying to grow or buy the plants when they're growing is, yes, such a cheap way of filling quite a large area of ground. And then I tend to split it up into different batches so that I can sow in one direction, north to south, then take another bowl, sow east to west, so that I'm trying to create an even coverage. Sowing to the recommended grams per meter squared is really important. You don't want to underdo it, but you don't want to overdo it either. And you can also see at the right-hand side of that shot some little home envelopes. I always carry some little paper envelopes when I go out into the countryside from late spring through to late autumn and collect little bits of seed that I add to my mixes. Then it's broadcasting the seed. As I say, you can mix that seed with something like sharp sand or silver sand to make it more visible as you're sowing, to see where you've done it. And then after a bit of watering, it's waiting for the magic to happen. And the magic certainly does happen. And I'm going to confuse you here because what I'm showing you is a big old color burst, a big old rainbow of flowers. These are cornfield annuals. And one of the little tricks of creating a wildflower perennial hay meadow is that you can, for that first year, put in what's often called a nurse crop of cornfield annuals. They grow really quickly, whilst the perennials are slowly germinating, slowly establishing themselves. And so in that first year, you can get some of that beautiful burst of color, because that first year of dig and sow is the same whether it's cornfield annuals or whether it's hay perennial wildflowers. So here we are in the first year with the glorious blue of cornflower and the kind of pinky lilac of corncockle and the bright yellow of corn marigold, and there'll be some corn, other corn flowers in there amongst it as well, creating that first year burst of color. And this is where I'd sown a little bit of the top of the meadow, but further on from there, you can see the meadow into year 2, where it's losing some of that color burst and turning to a much more grass-based tapestry of flower. And this is it down in the meadow itself, when it really is beginning to establish. You've lost that color burst, but you've got little bits of yellow, which there are going to be bird's foot trefoil, and I've got both species, the common bird's foot trefoil and the greater bird's foot trefoil. You can see some bursts of corn marigold still in the background with that beautiful sunshine yellow, and now some perennial, the pink there, a red campion, one of our misnamed plants. It should be called pink campion, but it's called red campion. So the meadow beginning to establish itself with the perennial flowers within it. Now, one of the things I like to do with the meadows is then monitor what happens as the habitat develop and what wildlife comes in. And in my garden, I monitor things such as butterfly populations, bird populations, dragonflies, damselflies, those kind of things. Here's the meadow really beginning to establish itself now, really lost a lot of that intense colour. All the colour is now turned into a mini tapestry that you see when you look close up. And in terms of the wildlife that's moving in, well, that bird's foot trefoil that you saw can prove to be a magnet for this creature. This is on the left, the caterpillar, and on the right, the finished pupal case, chrysalis, of six-spot burnet moths. Their caterpillars feed on the bird's foot trefoil, and I love it as a moth because they have this amazing capacity to synthesize from the juices from the bird's foot trefoil. They synthesize cyanide, hydrogen cyanide, and they mix that with some pyrazines as well. They then give themselves the colorful patterning, which means that birds don't predate them. And it's thought that the females actually exude, they actually waft into the air cyanide to draw in the males. And you can see a mating pair here on knapweed, one of the flowers that very typically comes up from a perennial meadow mix, with another male zooming in, presumably having sniffed the cyanide and thinking that good times are afoot. This is a creature that I'd never seen before. And I love this thing. When you create a habitat in your garden and you're looking at it day in, day out, you begin to see things that maybe you've never seen when you're out on a walk in the countryside. And this little moth that is fluttering above my garlic mustard that came up in the meadow, it has meadow in its name. It lives up to it. So this is the meadow longhorn moth. It's one of those which is called the micro moth, but it's a readily visible moth. It's not a tiny moth. It's related to some of the other longhorns, which have ridiculously long antennae, but this one is ridiculous enough. And I get these little bouncing clouds of meadow longhorns. Their caterpillars feed on the developing seeds of the garlic mustard. And so that's where the adult moths cluster. This is quite a widespread moth. So if you create a meadow and you have garlic mustard in, you have a fabulous chance of getting the meadow longhorn, as well as a much more famous user of garlic mustard and of cuckoo flower, which is the orange tip butterfly. And if you want to find out more about moths, then later on in our series in February, we've got Emily Ellis talking on the 26th of February all about moths in the garden and how to create a wildlife-friendly garden for that. Another visitor, another arrival to my chicken pen meadow is another feeder on the bird's foot trefoil that has prospered there, and that is the common blue butterfly. We've got a female on the left, busy with a male on the right, and I love the fact that when you create a new habitat, creatures can colonize. But I'm just going to flip out of meadows for a while just to confirm what I think is the essence of wildlife-friendly gardening. Oh, I said I'd do that. I'll just point this out here. Hopefully, where the finger is pointing, you can just make out, in fact, I've got an arrow. There's the egg of common blue butterfly laid by the female on the trefoil leaves of bird's foot trefoil. So yes, when you've created a habitat in your garden, the key thing is that the habitat itself doesn't attract wildlife per se. What you're relying on is that wildlife is on the move. And most of the photos in this presentation, almost all of them are my photos, including this one of the toad. But I do love it when you go on the internet. I plugged in wildlife on the move. It's so crazy what it comes up with. Here we go, wildlife on the move. Wildlife is wandering from garden to garden, from countryside into garden and back again. And I think the key job that we have as wildlife-friendly gardeners is to create the habitat so that when wildlife, by chance, comes into your garden, it finds what it's looking for. Wildlife-friendly gardening, it's not about attracting things from afar. It's about giving those wildlife that pass the reason to stay. It's about saying, welcome to paradise. You've arrived. This is what you were looking for. And so, for example, within the chicken pen meadow, one of the plants that I was keen to put in was kidney vetch, which is the food plant of this tiny little butterfly, our tiniest butterfly, the small blue. The closest colonies to me, I think, are about 2 kilometers away, but I thought it was worth a shot. And here is a small blue that has managed to find kidney vetch within my garden and laid eggs. And to find such a rare butterfly visiting the garden because you've created the habitat and because you've given it reason to stay when it happened to pass through is such a thrill. Okay, so that was case study number 1. Case study number 2, we'll move to a smaller meadow. It is right next to my chicken pen meadow, but only occupies a space of about 5 meters by 5 meters. And I'm using a technique here which has its greatest proponents over in Germany, where it's called, my apologies for my German pronunciation, Hügelkultur. I'm sure somebody will leap in to correct me there. Basically, it means mound culture. And as part of preparing my overgrown garden, it did require the felling of about 32 Leylandii at the request of my new neighbours. But I was determined to do minimum in, minimum out. So if the garden had grown Leylandii, the garden was going to keep Leylandii, but I was going to create a mound out of them. And in Hügelkultur, you create a mound out of sticky, twiggy, loggy material, and then you cover it with soil. And because I was creating ponds in the garden, I had some soil that I needed to have something to do with. So I did my Hügelkultur. Oh, I'll just point out in the foreground here, beautiful plant. So this is Echium blue beta, which flowers from the first year in seed. It's related to our Echium vulgare, but which is Viper's bugloss. And I find this one of the very best plants for pollinators, which is my chance to just say that our next talk in the series about pollinators is Tuesday the 13th with Francesca Martelli and a bit about invasive non-natives with Thomas. So I hope you'll join us for that as well about pollinators. So yeah, Hügelkultur. Here's my mound freshly made. Here's that mound in its first year after sowing with a wildflower perennial seed mixture. What you can see in the middle in the white, that's the froth of wild carrot. You can see some pink campion that's come up. Yeah, all sorts of species coming up through the mix there. I can see some borage actually that's come up at the top of the mix there. Probably through that and is a lovely another first year annual to throw in the mix. And my mound meadow, even though it's so small, is a wonderful source. Here's Bird's-foot trefoil, which is a wonderful nectar and pollen plant for carder bees, common carder bees. But the mound, because it has those sunny south-facing slopes and colder, moister north-facing slopes, well, those warm slopes are brilliant for solitary bees to create their nests. And this is one of the Andrina solitary bees. I think this is, I'm looking closely, this is chocolate mining bee, which nests in baked ground in little holes within it, which is what happens when you create a mound and it begins to settle out. Little holes begin to develop, which are taken over by mining bees, which themselves then draw in some of the rather glamorous creatures that parasitize them. Looking at these, you'd be forgiven for thinking you were looking at a couple of wasps here, but these are solitary bees themselves. These are nomad bees which specialize in hunting out the nests of chocolate mining bees. In fact, there are many different species of nomad bees, each of which specializes in another type of solitary bee to parasitize. So they look for the nest, they find it, they spot the female of the chocolate mining bee going in, and they themselves follow in and lay their eggs within the nests of the Andrina mining bees. So there we go, case study number 2. I'm going to take us away from my garden in Sussex up to my mum's meadow, her mini meadow up in Worcestershire. Now this is the garden that I knew as a child. My mum's lived here for pushing 60 years now, and I have never known the back lawns as anything other than a mown lawn. My mum and dad didn't fertilize them, they didn't put herbicides down, but they got the lawnmower out with great regularity. And when I was of a certain age, I would be required to get the mower out in a certain regularity. So a close cropped lawn was what I've known this lawn to be all the time. Now that my mum is at the stage where mobility is a problem, and now that I'm a passionate advocate for mini meadows, I invited her to try a mini meadow of her own and see what would happen if she asked her gardener to cease mowing for a short while. So in the first two case studies, we've seen mini meadows created from scratch. This is a mini meadow created out of a long-standing existing lawn. And this is what happened when Mum stopped her gardener mowing. Immediately as in with only a matter of a few weeks in spring, it became a flush of flowers that my mum had never seen. And up close, it was a really intriguing mix of stuff. We've obviously got the white clover there, but we've also got, I think that's lesson medic there, and I can see speedwell buds about to burst into flower. And going across that lawn, once it had been allowed to have its head, allow it to grow, suddenly all those species that were existing in the lawn grabbed their chance to flower, and in doing so to support the pollinators, but also in doing so to create this mini jungle, a much richer, damper, lusher place for wildlife to exist. Mum was absolutely delighted to find that violets came up, and I think you can just see the spur on the back of one of those, showing that it's actually a dog violet that came up, and that front one's got a little fly. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the fly, but it looks like a little sepsis fly to me there. So to find that these things were in the lawn, subsisting as little vegetative leaf bases, just waiting for their moment to flower. But what Mum did want is the ability to get across that lawn to her bench and to look out and to feel that that lawn still felt loved and looked after. And so what she got the gardener to do was to mow her mini meadows into neatly defined squares across the lawn. You can see she can still walk down the path, get across to her bench and enjoy the meadows. And she absolutely adored the effect and loved that this little gem had been hidden and, as if by magic, emerged, to the point where not only were meadow butterflies such as gatekeepers and meadow browns visiting the little bits of mini meadow, but they became this haven for insects, which then drew in the spiders, which then became dotted with dew come the autumn. But also popping up totally unexpectedly was lady's bedstraw. Here, the yellow plant here, a plant that used to get collected in days of yore because the scent of it, once you put it in amongst your sack of bedding that you lay on at night, just oozed a lovely fragrant odor. And I do think the odors of a mini meadow are one of its hidden delights that doesn't get promoted strongly enough. But what happens with wildlife is that when the bedstraw gets its head, is allowed to grow, then it draws in, or has the chance of drawing in, some of our most glamorous moths. You know, when you've got a big caterpillar that has got a spur on its bottom, then you know you've got the caterpillar of a hawk moth. And this is the caterpillar of a hummingbird hawk moth, a specialist on ladies' bedstraw and hedge bedstraw as the food plant of the caterpillar. So suddenly you're opening up this habitat, and a moth that many of us know and love in small numbers when it visits our Verbena bonariensis or other select flowers as the adult, what it's also really looking for is this. It's sniffing out bedstraw on which it feels it's got the chance to lay its eggs and start the next generation. Back to my garden, and we've seen mini meadows made from scratch, mini meadows made from existing long-standing old lawns, but I was intrigued to see what would happen or what was possible in terms of making a mini meadow from a new lawn. So this one is tiny, and I hope it's one that many people could replicate. So it's only 3 meters by 3 meters. This is how I started with, I cleared the ground. It really was just mud and weeds to start with, put down some sand just because a lawn is going to do much better with a bit of good drainage. And onto that, including around the pond, I laid a load of turf and then allowed my 3 meter by 3 meter square meadow just to grow. The rest of it is grass paths, and I continue to mow these, but I was so intrigued to find out what would happen with bog standard B&Q garden turf if I let it grow. And it was beautiful, and it had an ethereal quality to it. It created this lovely frothy effect within it. But really, it was just meadow grasses, the pear grasses, and some perennial ryegrasses. Often your bog standard B&Q meadow mix, lawn mix is just probably 3 or 4 different grass cultivars. but how to then turn this into a biodiverse, florally diverse meadow. So the technique, and this can be done in spring or autumn, is to mow it really tightly. So here's me with my push mower, getting it down as close as I can to the thatch of the lawn, and then give it a good old scrape, a good old scarify. It's amazing what comes up when you do it, given that this lawn hadn't had a chance to develop any moss in it. So scratch all that up, and that opens up little pockets of soil that when you then scatter wildflower meadow seed, they've got a chance to germinate. If you scattered into the lawn itself, then the grass is so vigorous that there's very little chance for the seed to germinate. So here's my mix about to be scattered at the right grams per meter squared rate, which is typically around 4 grams per meter squared. Sow it over the meadow, give it a water, and here's the meadow in only its first year. And over on the left-hand side of the bird table, you can see a slightly more glaucous and a bit of yellowy stuff. That is yellow rattle coming through. It's also scattered throughout the rest of the meadow. You can also see the yellow of buttercups coming through. And as I say, I continue to monitor these meadows to see what happens, what grows, what doesn't, what wildlife comes. This is it by year 2, and the really tall buttercups coming through is meadow buttercup. There's a couple of teasel coming through. I would continue to do some spot weeding in this if there's anything in there that comes through that perhaps I think might overpower the meadow. Here it is from another position with the buttercups coming through. And the tall kind of spires of hedge bedstraw beginning to push through. Also common vetch, that's the kind of pinky purple showing above the bird bath. So beginning to develop a real diversity there. And it's the place of choice within my garden for my jays to come and bury their acorns in the autumn. As I'm sure many of you know, they go around October, November time, gather the acorns. They can take up to 13, which they store in their crop down in their throat. And once they've gathered a little store of acorns, they come and find some deep grass, and one by one they regurgitate the acorns and then push them into soft but mixed turf. They love this mixed turf, and it was fascinating to see how, having buried each acorn, they then mark the spot with a leaf, presumably hoping that that leaf stays there and allows them a little visual cue to come back to the lawn later on. It's the lawn of choice for my leaf cutter bees to come and nectar at the bird's foot trefoil. And I love these things, both in their leaf cutting techniques and the fact they're so willing to use a drilled log or a bee hotel. But I love the fact as well that quite often when they're nectaring from the flowers, it's a bottoms up moment when they're nectaring. They will use the pollen brush that's actually under their abdomen on the female here, rather than, they don't have a pollen brush on their legs to collect pollen. But if they're just out there for the nectar, then it's bums in the air. So there we go. That's my 4 experiments so far in my current meadow. Just to summarize the steps of mini meadow making for you. On prepared earth, it's a case of digging, whether that be clearing, rotivating, maybe putting down some cardboard, then waiting and hoeing off any weeds that emerge, raking to a fine tilth, then sowing the seed. Often it's recommended to walk over that seed or rake it gently in so it has good contact with the soil, particularly if you have things like pigeons, then to rake it gently in is good. Or you can these days, new thing on the market, lay wildflower turf, which still requires the ground preparation. Water is needed to set the seed going, and then after that it's a case of mowing and always removing the clippings so you're not adding extra fertility. On an old lawn, it's just really a case of letting it grow. You can add some plug plants if you like. And if you want to add yellow rattle with that, its ability to tap into the grass roots and reduce the vigor of grass, then you can do so. But ideally, you do need to cut that lawn hard, scarify it and scatter the seed. But I always recommend with an old lawn, just let it grow, just see what's in there to start with. And on a new lawn, then it is a case of cutting it hard, spring or autumn, scarifying it with a rake, doing that big scratching, sowing, and then you're into the mowing cycle after that, removing the cuttings. When to make your meadow, and the reason why we decided to put this talk on now is that we're heading to that point in spring, which is ideal, whichever form you want to do, whichever of those 3 methods. March to May is ideal, or you can do in September, October. And then that big question, which is that final one on each of those things, the mowing thing, when to mow. And I don't like to prescribe on that one because it really is your choice. Just to give you an example, I tend to mow first thing in the spring, as soon as the grass starts to grow, and then I'll leave it for as long as possible into maybe mid-August, late August, September. But I try to vary it, and I try to mow different parts of the meadows at different times. But you'll be familiar with No Mow May, and the advice or the encouragement to leave it in May and then mow at the end of May. I'm equally as passionate about No Mow June, or No Mow July, or No Mow May, June and July. So there's plenty of choice for you there. I thought I'd just show you some of my favorite flowers. Here's that yellow rattle, the meadow maker, the one that sends its roots down and draws some of the energy out of the grass, allowing other perennial wildflowers to bloom. But you do have a genuine chance within a mini meadow after a number of years to get orchids come up. This is pyramidal on the left-hand side, bee orchid on the right-hand side. You obviously need to have it within the mix that you sow. You're far more likely to get buttercups, and there are different species. On the left, we've got bulbous buttercup, which you can tell because the sepals, the little mini petals as they were underneath the main petals, are recurved. They bend backwards when the flower opens. And on the right, we've got meadow buttercup, whose sepals remain upright, supporting the flower. Cowslip is a really easy one to get going in meadows, but the seed does need to go through winter in order to germinate. So I tend to just push some seeds into the ground in winter, one by one. They're a big seed, and I just push them into the soil in any little gap in the meadow, and then they germinate in year 1 and flower in year 2 and then onwards. And you'll need to sow yellow rattle in autumn too, because it also needs that winter chill to activate the seeds. Things such as bugle here or self-heal, closely related, are wonderful meadow flowers to have. And then taller flowers, on the left, meadow cranesbill, I think one of our most beautiful native flowers. And on the right is betony, Stachys officinalis, a brilliant plant for solitary bees and just a beautiful thing to grow in your mini meadow. And something that crops up in almost any meadow mix are the knapweeds. This is black or common knapweed, drawing in a 6-spot burnet and a meadow brown butterfly, wonderful nectar plants. You also get the one called the greater knapweed, which has an outer row of petals around that central thistle-like tuft, which make them extra beautiful. You can put bulbs into the mini meadow, in which case you wouldn't want to mow early in spring as a spring first cut, because you'd want to let things such as snake's head fritillary flower, set seed, and then draw all the energy back into the bulbs again. And I'm pleased to say that within Chicken Pen Meadow, a meadow that I didn't know whether it would survive, whether it would work, because all the advice that you tend to see is that you must put a meadow on unfertile soil. Well, my chicken pen had been a chicken pen for 40 years, and I can't think of a more fertile soil than in a chicken pen. And yet this is one of the rosettes of common spotted orchid that's come up in my chicken pen meadow and has now flowered for the last 2 years, and is such a thrill, such a delight. I thought to conclude, I'd just do a little mini meadow problem solver. If you've got this problem in your meadow, then you really have got a problem. I think that all of the problems that we're likely to face in a mini meadow are relatively easy to resolve. The first one is flopped or flattened grass. And I left my square meadow in year 1 and had this occur to it overnight. The day before, this was fully upstanding, fully beautiful meadow. The culprit was that long grass appears to be very attractive to spring and summer foxes to have a good old roll in. But also you can get a flattened meadow just because of the vigor of grasses, just making them top heavy and topple over. And at that point, I'd say as soon as you've got a toppled meadow, whenever it is, whatever your plans were for mowing, mow as soon as it's toppled, because you don't want it suppressing and crushing any perennial that's growing beneath. When you do get to the point of cutting a mini meadow at maybe the end of May, maybe towards the end of the summer, it can often look browner than the surrounding grass. And the key thing here is not to fret, because that is, I think that photo was then taken 5 weeks later. It soon greens up and covers up what was previously the brown patch. The grass within is designed to do that. It comes straight back as green. And my final little problem solver for mini meadows is just to say that not everything likes long grass. Long grass isn't the solution to wildlife needs per se. We still need some short grass. And if it wasn't for short grass, then things like starlings or song thrushes wouldn't have the short sward that makes it easy for them to find the insect prey that they need. Oh, and how to safeguard wildlife when you're mowing. My prime advocacy for mowing, if you took a lawnmower straight over a mini meadow in one go, you can only imagine the caterpillars or voles or grasshoppers, all the wildlife that's in there would get knocked in one go. And even with my 20 by 30 meter mini meadow, I get in there with a set of shears, and I love it because you're getting all the scent come off the bed straws and the bird's-foot trefoils, and bit by bit it extends it. I get intimate contact with my meadow, and it's certainly well easy to do in something like a 3 meter by 3 meter meadow. It really is only half an hour's work to do with a set of shears and just gives wildlife the chance to escape. So my final but one slide is a very quick summary of mini meadow making. I hope you've enjoyed seeing it done in different ways, and hopefully enjoyed the fact that if you previously thought it wasn't possible in your garden because either you don't have the space or you thought your soil might be too rich, neither of those things are a problem or an inhibitor. You can make it on fertile soil, you can make it in a tiny space. But here is my 6-point summary. Number one, it is such a great thing to do. The pleasure that I get from it is so huge. The wildlife benefits are so obvious. There are many different ways to make one. Try them out. Try hugelkultur if you want to. Try different ways of doing it. Not everything that you do will work, but that's fine. Don't stress about it. Just enjoy the journey. Remember that variety is good, which is why no-mow May is fantastic, but don't restrict yourself to it. Try the no-mow June, try the no-mow summer, try whatever you want to, because diversity in management is diversity for wildlife. Make sure you enjoy the process, but I promise you that you will. And then shout about it, because we need lots and lots of people to do it. To see us out, I'm going to leave us with what I think must be the most glorious meadows in film history, and something that gladdens my heart. And I look forward to hearing any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for that really, really informative and inspiring talk. Fantastic stuff. I should just quickly introduce myself. I'm Mark. I'm another one of the forum trustees, and I've been doing my best, and it's been no mean task, to keep on top of all the questions coming in. Adrian, you've really sort of struck a nerve with this topic today. So I've got about a page and a half of questions, and I do my best to get through. People have also been doing a great job at answering each other's questions in the chat, which we really appreciate.
Which is the essence of the forum, isn't it? That is
absolutely
what we're all about.
But okay, so I'm going to try and do my best to get through some of them. If we don't get to your question, I'm very sorry, but I did put some resources, and I can see other resources going in that you can refer to. So you won't be short of information, I hope. Right, Adrian. So the first question, I think you addressed this to some extent already, but we had a number of questions asking how small can a mini meadow be? And if you've only got a tiny backyard or even a balcony, can you still do something? Can you do it in a pot even? What would you think about that?
So I have seen them done in pots, and that is, I have got 2 meadows going in this year. One is another one which is about 20 by 20 meters, and I'm going to try some new techniques in that. And the other, I'm going to do it in a pot. I'm so glad that I've seen folk who've done it in a pot. There is, the smaller you get, then your expectation has to reduce with it. There's a limit to how many plant species you're going to get. There's a reducing likelihood that things like grasshoppers will visit it, but nevertheless, something will benefit from that mini meadow. So if you've only got a pot and you've only got a balcony, I'd say still absolutely go through the process. Remember that it will change year in, year out, but enjoy that process and enjoy anything that comes to visit it. And I think what it does as well is it gives you an insight into the meadows when you go and visit them for real, when you go for walks in the countryside. Do it, whatever the size.
Great, thanks, Adrian. So I'm getting distracted here by comments about tight white trousers in the chat as well. So yeah, you've also there's going to be some fashion victims, I think, as well now. Right, a few questions came in. I think we've had a question from Jenny about this, also Alison and Anne. What can you do in a garden if you've only got minimal sun, or if it's in the shade, or you've got a problem with moss? Can a mini meadow still work in that sort of context?
So it absolutely can again. So that's really useful to know. So the brilliant native wildflower seed suppliers will have mixes that are suitable for different soil types. They'll often sell a general one. That's the nice cheap one. It is great to start with, but they'll sell one for sunny sites, for clay soils, for chalky soils, and they'll sell one which is for woodland areas as well. Often within that, they will put things such as bluebells, but they'll put garlic mustard into that as well. Anything that will survive in a woodland environment, and they'll change the grass mix to suit. And whilst the meadow butterflies, such as gatekeeper, meadow brown, marbled white, won't go into a shady area, speckled wood will, and it'll use those grasses that are in a woodland mix. Again, you just have to change your expectations slightly about what will grow, and you'll probably actually have more woodland flowers. It'll look better in spring than many of the summer meadows do, but choose your mix accordingly to your location. But yes, very much you've still got a chance to do it, because woodland environments have native grasses that are evolved to cope with shady conditions.
Great, thank you, Adrian. So quite a few questions. You mentioned in the chat, I think, Emma's Gate seeds as being, you think you said you would show the meadow from Richard Brown, I think, there, who set that up. So clearly they're a recommended source, but are there any other recommended suppliers that you could point people towards?
I'm going to forget the names of some of them, because as soon as you Google them, most of them have as their, even though they have a company name, their website title is normally wildflowerseeds.co.uk or wildflowerseedsuk.co.uk. There are, I would say, about 5 brilliant places out there. So Emma's Gate is great, but don't discount the other ones. British Wildflower Seeds, I think, is one of them. Mark, you may be able to remember better than my brain is what some of the others are. If you go into them, look, whichever one you go into, check that the seed is sourced from the UK. Have a look through the species list. There are some which sell seed which has been harvested from some of the millennium type meadows, which are fantastic, because then you can put a bit of Dorset in your garden, or a bit of the Chilterns, or a bit of Northumbria into your garden, and choose one that feels closest to you. But yeah, brilliant suppliers out there. Make sure that they say really clearly UK source seed and native wildflowers, and when you get those, then you know you've got a good mix.
Lovely, thank you. I was going to ask about native plants as well, but I think you've made that point strongly about native and sort of UK provenance, so I'll move on to something else. Quite a lot of questions came in about how you control sort of problem plants or species that are too vigorous, whether it's nettles or docks or even oxeye daisy, some of the species that are actually in the mix themselves. So what's your approach there, Adrian, where you have these sort of dominant species that you might want room for other things as well?
And I do spot weed. So there are 2 things here. One is that a mini meadow isn't maintenance free. You've got the mowing to do, and I would advocate some spot weeding of anything that looks like it's just getting a bit too vigorous. So out of mind come the cow parsley, or most of it, the teasel, most of it, any bramble that seems to get in there, and I get a flush of oak trees from the acorns that the jays have planted. But equally, I'd say that spot weeding is really quite quick and really quite fascinating, because you find things when you're doing it. And of all the areas in my garden, the 2 areas that are the least maintenance of all are the ponds and the mini meadows. Less time spent in those than any other, apart from the fact I keep getting distracted to look in them. But in terms of actual physical work, they are so low maintenance, it's fantastic.
I'm all for that. Sounds good. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Okay, a question from Andy, and you'll know about these, Adrian. There's quite a trend now for these sort of low nutrition soil meadows using maybe crushed concrete or other waste products. I don't think you really touched on that in your talk. What's your thought? You're thinking about using these sort of waste substrates for creating meadows.
Yeah, so I love them, and there've been some wonderful exponents of that. John Little's done some fabulous ones in Essex with his. Because I have got in my garden a minimum in, minimum out principle, then I don't need to import some waste material from somewhere else. I wanted to use what the gardener's got. But if you've got a garden that has got no soil in it, or you've got a source of this and can bring in a concrete crusher because you've got a source of concrete that in the garden already, then I'd say go for it, because that low nutrient will create, they're particularly great for solitary bees, things that like a really hard baking. You'll have a much sparser sward as well. And on that final slide, I talked about variety. Well, if you want to do that, and that's very different than any garden around you, you're creating such a different habitat, and I'd say go for it. I've just seen up in the chat, Futurescape. No, not Futurescape, Naturescape. That's what was in my mind. Brilliant source. I get a lot of my seed from Naturescape as well. Another brilliant supplier.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adrian. I'm going to try and wrap things up in the next couple of minutes to keep to time, but honestly, it's an impossible job to ask all these questions. Quite a lot of discussion in the chat about yellow rattle. So you mentioned sowing it in autumn, I believe. Someone, I'm looking for the name, but I can't find who it is now. I'm sorry, but we're saying they've tried everything. They've done it in autumn. They've done it in spring. It's still not germinating. Do you have any other tips on how to get yellow rattle to establish?
So that scarifying is the really key thing, because yellow rattle has quite a papery, large seed, and unless that seed is sat in contact with the soil and not competing with the grasses, it'll do its best to germinate, but just won't get up and flower. So I'd say take a small area. Yellow rattle seed is one of the cheapest out there. It's way cheaper than the mixes that you get. So for the cost of a couple of quid, give it a good try in a bit of a garden, but really do ensure it's got soil to germinate into. It won't cope if it's just sat on thatch or sat on grass.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm just seeing if we've got time for one final question. I think I might ask this one. So I think you mentioned again, you gave some great examples of meadows that you visited yourself, Adrian, and again, I can't find the name of the person that we're asking. Is there, I think it was Fiona, sorry Fiona, is there a catalogue somewhere, a website saying meadows across the UK that we can visit nearby to where we might live? Are you aware of that sort of a resource?
I'm not. Most of those that are out there are managed by people like the Wildlife Trust or Natural England, and I think that Google will bring up most. When I go to a county I've not been to before, I put in meadow SSSI or something like that into a Google search, or go into the Wildlife Trust website, because they've often got these small patches of meadow, and from that it throws up some of these most delightful places. I am Julie Andrews whenever I reach those meadows.
Yeah, well, hopefully your garden might be on that list as well, Adrian. I really want to visit myself now. So, right, I'm going to wrap things up because it's just past 8. First of all, Adrian, thank you so much again. It's a shame that we can't all unmute and give you a round of applause, but I'm sure people are doing that virtually. Thank you so much for your time. Really informative talk, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure I can see from the comments how much everyone has really enjoyed it. So thank you, Adrian. I also want to say thank you to Helen and Judith and everyone else from the Wildlife Gardening Forum. There's a lot of effort that goes into putting this or the whole series of these talks on. So thank you very much to both of you and all the forum. Just to say as well that there will be a recording of the talk available on the website, and people again in the chat have mentioned they can't keep on top of all the information and want to go back and watch it again. So that will be there. And also just to recommend that, please do go to our website. We're already putting some links in the chat there. You can sign up, you can register for e-newsletters, and you'll also find links to the Eventbrite page, which has got the details of the upcoming talks. Please do find the information out there. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for all the fantastic questions. And we hope to see you again soon at one of our next talks. So thanks again, Adrian. Thank you to everyone. And good night. Have a good rest of your evening.